Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Now, you guys know we're covering the Scott Nelson case, and we crystallize the best moments that we can for our audience when we're going through this death penalty phase of this particular case. And I don't think as a lawyer who's been trying cases for 30 years, it gets much better than Scott Nelson, especially on cross-examination. You can see that pent-up rage. You can see almost like a, how dare you ask me a question, in my opinion. He seems to me, if I were crossing him, that I could get this guy to pop. I could get this guy to go off in front of this jury in one way or another. Let's listen to a little bit more of the prosecution's cross. Oh boy. Okay, guys, listen, I got another guest. I'm just gonna get right to it. Page Pate, how are you, sir? It's great to have you back on the show. I'm just like trying to wrap my arms around everything that I just heard there. Page, is this not the most unbelievable testimony you have ever heard coming out of the mouth of a person in a death penalty case?
I think so. I've never seen anything like it. And instinctively, I'm feeling like as defense lawyers must be feeling while they're listening to this, find a place I can hide. It's just a devastating cross-examination, and not because of the way the questions are being asked, just simply because this guy's off the rails and he's literally digging his own grave. It was just unreal to watch that unfold.
I would have loved to have crossed this guy. I mean, like everyone's got their different thing, but when he said, "I feel like you're putting a gag in my mouth," I said, "Well, it's not like you're putting duct tape around somebody and killing them. That I'm not doing that to you, right?" Anyway. So he sits here, he feels like it's a game here. The facts are being manipulated. And he took his anger out because of the probation officer, Dominguez. And one thing I would have loved to have known on cross, Gene Rossi, is that, well, why didn't you do it some other day in that month before when you had the gun, you had the availability, you knew where he was? Why did you change your attention and your anger from him and decide to displace it towards this woman who had done nothing to you? We really didn't get into the flesh of that. Not that you have to. Not that you have to. The prosecutor's doing a great job, but I'll tell you what, I would have just been having so much fun in there. I would have just been tweaking the guy left and right because he can explode at any given moment. What do you think?
Well, the cross-examination may touch on that, but I just thought of something. When those jurors go into that deliberation room, and when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Alexandria, we had a defendant in prison who killed the second person in prison. It was his third murder, but the second one in prison. And we were arguing to the jury, albeit unsuccessfully, my office was, that even if you impose life, while he's in prison, he may kill somebody else. So with his demeanor and what he's saying on the stand, I can see several jurors in deliberation saying, "Hey, I'm not giving this guy life. Even in prison, he'll probably take a guard's life, a fellow prisoner's life. Yeah, he has to be given death." Yeah, Gene
and Paige, one of the biggest things in a death penalty case is remorse. But when she says you decide you take your anger out on an innocent person, he said, well, I agree with that. I mean, it's not even like, I feel bad, I feel sad, it's a terrible thing. Usually, I mean, it's just absolutely insane, not in the legal way. There's very few people in my entire career, I could say, on one hand, that were just honestly sociopathically evil people. And I hate to say that about any individual, but this guy fits the bill for me for sure. Anyway, let's listen to a little bit more of this debacle of testimony. Wow, that's another mind blower, guys. I mean, first of all, he's agreeing with her in many areas, and she's really putting the stake through his heart that somebody was going to have to pay. He would say, yeah, and that he's stalking somebody for 2 weeks, two innocent people, not the probation officer. I mean, any more premeditated he can't get. And of course, the one-liner that's going to probably last forever in the legal world is when she talks about the zip ties, never leave home without them. Paige, how, you know what, I was going to say, how is it possible he avoids a death penalty? But I'm not sure if you heard earlier on the show, there was one juror who just got removed and an alternate was put in there because they said they would not give the death penalty in the case. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's hard to believe, but obviously there are going to be some people. I mean, you would think at this point, once they've qualified the jury, you wouldn't have somebody on there who's just morally or philosophically opposed to the death penalty completely, and they would be willing to consider it. I totally agree with what Gene said earlier about the threat of future dangerousness to the community. Is this guy going to kill again? Being probably the single most important factor when a jury is determining death or life in a case. And this guy is literally laying out the prosecution's best case for giving himself the death penalty.
Yeah, Gene, I mean, talk about a self-destructive guy here. I heard you audibly gasp when the line came out, never leave home without them, referring to the zip ties, especially when you think about what this poor innocent lady went through for the significant period of time she did prior to her being murdered. What were you, you know, you're a seasoned guy. This obviously is impacting you emotionally to make that kind of sound when you heard it.
Not only was that a bad comment, a close second is he was adding levity to the proceeding. Okay, Jennifer Fulford and her family don't think this is a laughing matter. It's not a game. This is serious, sir. Don't add levity to your testimony.
Yeah, so guys, stylistically speaking, the prosecutor's kind of rolling with the punches here. And, you know, a lot of times people don't realize prosecutors don't necessarily have all the data or don't know what the defendant is going to specifically be saying when they get on that stand. So you got to kind of roll with the punches a lot more than the defense does in circumstances like this. And clearly, this is the kind of things being said that I'm pretty confident she would not have expected to come out. And a lot was probably in her head here, and like, you know, zip ties, don't leave home without them. Do I get pithy? Do I leave it alone? Do I follow up with a question? Just probably her brain must be firing a million miles a minute. Have you ever been in a scenario like that, Paige?
No, because I haven't prosecuted. But you guys are right. I think generally prosecutors, and no offense meant by this to prosecutors, are not as seasoned at cross-examination as defense lawyers. But this prosecutor is doing an outstanding job of having that discipline to keep herself out of the courtroom. Simply ask the questions, let this guy dig his own hole, and get out of his way. I mean, there's a temptation there to argue back with the guy, to play his game, to start trying to be cute and snippy. Don't do it. And she's had the discipline to let himself just kind of go down the line, give him enough rope, and he's going to hang himself.
Yeah, it's very, very well put. Although I'd like to play with him a little bit and poke him and tease him just a tad more to see where it could go.
It's a temptation, and every trial lawyer feels that temptation. But I think she's doing a great job of staying away from that, because all she can do is lose. I mean, he's done everything he can to convict himself and sentence himself to death. What more could she add by taking him on and confronting him?
I don't know, man. This guy is something else. And it's really sad. I'm not laughing about it because it's a really tragic case. Anyway, guys, great commentary as always. We got to do a little business here at the Law and Crime Network. We'll be back with more of the Scott Nelson case. All right, so as I indicated before, the attorneys are in the courtroom. They're at sidebar with the judge right now, so there's no real activity happening there. As you can see, there's a picture of all the lawyers up there. In the meantime, Gene, I mean, again, just as the most unsympathetic defendant. I mean, I know we keep saying it over and over again, but it's like he's enjoying this moment that he's got here. But what she just established in my mind was critical. This was about robbery, period. This was about cash. What do you think? Yes,
and all those things he said about blaming Julio, they've been vitiated, they've been erased, because he just wanted money. And I think the other motive that's hanging out there is, and I think the defense or the prosecution mentioned it in opening in the guilt phase, is that he had this dislike of people with wealth, people who are accomplished, because he was homeless, he had just gotten out of prison. So it was money plus rage and jealousy at those who may have wealth.
Right. Now, I think we see that potentially the defendant is welcome to the stand. Paige, I would add to exactly what Gene was saying. I, as a prosecutor, would be getting in there and say, don't beat this Dominguez thing was just gravy on top for him because he had a problem with the guy Dominguez. But that's what this really comes down to, is the banality of why it was he committed the theft in 2000, or the armed robbery, bank robbery in 2010. It was about it for his own personal getting money and getting back at people that had more than he did. Would you think the prosecutor would go that way? And if so, as a defense attorney, what do you do with that?
What do you do with his entire testimony as a defense attorney? I mean, it's incredibly damaging, very difficult to overcome. You know, I certainly agree with the idea that you need to address the argument he's making, that it's all because of my probation officer. But blaming your probation officer is not a defense for murder. And so I think the jury gets that. I think the only risk that the prosecution runs with that being out there is the jury thinking this guy is literally out of his mind. And not legally insane necessarily, but that could certainly add to their consideration of whether he's going to get death or a life sentence.
What do you think about that, Gene? You agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I got to tell you, he has sort of a Ted Bundy quality to him. And that he's just casually talking about how he's killed a person, how he's robbed, and the whole levity thing, don't leave home without it. He reminds me of Ted Bundy. Of course, he killed many more people. But I got to tell you, when it goes back to that deliberation room, when the jury deliberates, they're going to say, this guy is a potential killer of future victims. And that will be the main reason why they impose the death penalty.
Yeah, and Page, Gene brings out a great point. I was trying to look at it myself, and it wasn't until he said it. He does remind you of Bundy in that narcissistic way. They love the attention. He loves sparring. He's sitting there with his hand on his cheek as if nothing's going on, talking about these heinous things like it's nothing, blaming Dominguez. Yeah, I want some cash. There's something really cold, sociopathic about this guy.
Yes, and I think as a prosecutor, you let that get to the jury so they can see he's going to be a dangerous person. As Gene was saying, whether you put him in prison for life or you leave him out on the street, he's going to try to kill again because he is almost subhuman is the way that he's coming across. So I think the more he talks, the more he testified under cross-examination, the more the jury is going to dislike him, not relate to him at all, and be more willing to sentence him to death.
Yeah, I tell you, whether or not you want to talk about how the jury will view the actual homicide itself and its brutality, the manner in which he talks about that and his lack of remorse, or the danger that he presents to people in the future, for the prosecutor, they've got it all on all fronts as far as I'm concerned in this case. Again, we did have one juror, though, that just got removed because they were not going to impose or could not impose the death penalty in the case, so you never know. But if there was a case that screamed out for it, even I, who am not a fan of the death penalty, having tried them, I'm not a fan of it, but when I was prosecutor, I can't see myself not going forward with this kind of case as a death penalty case, because I did swear an oath to follow the law, and this would be the kind of guy I would salivate to get. Anyway, guys, thanks for the commentary. It's awesome as always. Again, there's activity going on inside that courtroom. When it sparks up, we're going to cover it as we do all cases gavel to gavel. Going to take a quick break. Great time for it. We'll be right back.